Alright, hello everybody, I'm back. So I wanted to take a second today and just say thank you all for tuning on, for everyone who's going to be watching this live, for everyone who's going to be watching this on replay. I feel like there's some information that needs to be brought out there to the public, and that's going to be going over food sensitivities, food allergies, and what it needs to be done in terms of how to test it and what it all really means. So I feel like a lot of times nowadays people are just throwing all these terms out there, not really fully understanding what they're talking about. So there are massive difference between your food sensitivities and food allergies and food intolerances, okay? So starting right off the bat, food intolerances like lactose intolerant means you do not have the enzyme secretion or the enzymes being produced to break down a certain part of that food that you are consuming. So lactose intolerant, you have an intolerance to lactose. Can't break it down, causes bloating, causes indigestion, all kinds of other symptoms. So that's why a lot of people don't respond greatly to dairy. So that's intolerance. And we talk about allergies. So food allergies are going to be when you have your IgE response. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I was misled on this as well. I was taught that IgGs and IgEs were both forms of allergies, and they are not. I've been digging and doing more and more research on it, and I'm going to explain to you why. So when you have an IgE, that's what we're typically talking about when we're talking about allergies. We go to an allergist, they're going to be testing for IgEs. What's going to cause that inflammatory reaction that can be life-threatening? What's going to close down your throat? Are you allergic to egg? Are you allergic to soy, peanuts? What is it that's going to cause an allergic reaction? It's a food allergy. It causes an allergic reaction. That is a very important test to run. Especially with kids, we want to make sure we understand what their bodies cannot handle very well. And then there are ways to test it. The most common standardized test that people do is going to be a skin prick test. I'm not a huge fan of that. I would rather have a blood draw test done to analyze it, and I'll explain how we do that later. But I feel like it's more important to extract it from the blood versus causing irritation or inflammation to a child's skin to figure out what's going on with their body. And why not test where the antibodies would be, which would be in the bloodstream. So that's one way to handle it. Now, IgEs are the actual allergies. And then we talk about our IgGs. IgGs are sensitivities. They're foods that you have the inability to break down the protein of. It causes inflammation. That inflammation causes you to have an allergic type reaction. It's not allergic. You're not having the same antibodies being produced. You do still mount a defense against those foods that you are sensitive to. So say, for example, I have a sensitivity to black pepper. If I eat black pepper, my body doesn't break down the proteins of pepper. However, that's possible. I'm not sure, but it does. And it will elicit an inflammatory response. It will cause irritation into my mucosal lining in my gut, and will eventually cause more and more irritation to the point where it's going to open up my gut and lead to a condition called leaky gut. So you have your IgGs. Now, the other form that we actually started testing recently is your IgAs. So IgAs are found in your mucosal membranes, so your sinus cavities as well as your digestive tract. When we have these IgAs being present, they're a more aggressive form of your IgGs, more or less. It's the same kind of immune response, but your IgAs are going to go after and actually destroy that mucosal lining. So people with ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease or a highly inflammatory bowel condition, autoimmune, can have a higher level of IgA immune responses or IgA food sensitivities. So the new test we brought on tests for that as well, because I felt like that's a very important marker for people to know. So you have black pepper, okay? So that's what I'm talking about there, Plunkett. So when you have that black pepper allergy, it's actually a sensitivity, and that's where I know you've been working with some people, and that's where that confusion can kind of come in. And again, I was taught from a lot of those guys as well, and then I branched off and actually did some research on it and found out that it's a sensitivity. And I'm going to explain how those sensitivities happen. It's great to get these things tested, but again, when we have these sensitivities, or even when we have that allergic allergy, that IgE response, there's always going to be a cause and effect. And we're going to talk about why our bodies can't break down certain foods, certain proteins, and it's all going to come down to one thing, okay? So I'm going to pull up a couple of things here. This is an x-ray of a patient, okay? So no HIPAA being violated, no names or anything like that, but this is a patient here. So I'm going to point, you can't see me pointing, but this giant air bubble, that black bubble that you're seeing on this patient, it's on the left-hand side, that's going to be called your Magenblase, or it's going to be your stomach. When we have that Magenblase getting bigger and bigger and bigger, that gastric air bubble getting bigger and bigger, it leads to a condition called hypochlorhydria, which is a condition where we do not produce enough stomach acid, and in so we can have symptoms where it feels like we do have too much stomach acid, where we have acid reflux, indigestion, heartburn, all those things that, people throw Prilosec, or I think Zyrtec is another one too. I don't know all of them now, but I know Prilosec is one of the number ones that they try to give. And so when you have low stomach acid, what does that mean? What does that mean for your health? It means a lot of things for your health. And this is one of the spots that we need to make sure we address, because if we don't ever improve our stomach acid, we will never get rid of our food sensitivities, and we will never work on our food allergies, okay? Let me break this down. So we have these swollen gastric air bubbles. We know that we have a situation where we don't have enough stomach acid. What can we do to raise our stomach acid up? Not the pH, but raise the concentration up to be able to break down and sterilize the food. So I said two very important things. Breakdown of food, which is where we have to fully break down the proteins of these foods before they enter into your digestive tract. Then the other thing it does is it sterilizes the food. So say we have an E. coli outbreak, or we have something, or salmonella, where we're going to eat food that has those certain bacteria on them, and we bring it in, we don't have enough stomach acid. What's going to happen is we're going to be more susceptible to having a reaction or having an infection due to that low stomach acid. It's one of our first lines of defense. So we have to make sure we're raising that stomach acid concentration, so that way we can break down the proteins, so we can overcome allergies and sensitivities, and we can also make sure we have a healthy environment in there. Otherwise, people have heard the term H. pylori. We can have different type of infections, SIBO, can creep up, all due to low stomach acid. Now, this patient had a history of digestive issues. So if we're looking up on this x-ray here, I'm going to try to hold it like I know what I'm doing here. So we have this x-ray right here, and on that x-ray we're seeing actual impressions of the patient's intestines, okay? If we have black balls that are being found on that x-ray, it means that we have some pretty significant inflammation. Okay, so what can happen? Food sensitivities can rip up the gut. We can have IgG responses, IgA responses, IgE responses that are all going after and attacking your digestive tract. So what that does is it will eventually tear down and wear away that intestinal lining and lead to a condition that we all have heard about, I'm sure, before, especially if you're on my page. It's called leaky gut. So what does that mean? Let's bring up a picture here. So leaky gut starts off with a healthy gut. So this is one of the labs that we started using, some of the supplements we started using because of the research behind it, but I'll get into that later. So I pulled this tab off of here, and what you're seeing here is what a normal, healthy gut looks like. And there's a couple things that are very important to notice on this picture. So we have a healthy mucosal or strong mucosal layer or barrier. That mucosa is very important for motility, for calming down inflammation, allowing for your gut to be nice and happy and healthy. But what will happen is over time with inflammation, with food sensitivities, we'll keep wearing away that lining. And the more we wear it away, it looks like water. It's going to start to drop down on us. If it drops down, then we start having more direct irritation to your actual intestinal lining. And it does go up and down like that. So you have these little junctions, if you will, and they're called strong, but they're called tight gap junctions, or tight junctions. They're supposed to be very, very, very tight. Top to bottom, front to back, everything is supposed to be really, really, really tight. So that way you have to go across the microvilli to go in and get it absorbed in the bloodstream, and everything is super happy, healthy, and neat. But when we have irritation, we have those inflammatory responses happening, what will occur is the condition of leaky gut. So what does that look like? So if, again, we look through this picture, what we're seeing is a couple things. We're having all of this inflammatory burden happening. We can have viruses, bacteria, parasites, all these things slip through, damage down, get through the mucosal lining, and start to rip apart those tight junctions. And you can see the little irritation on the red. It starts to separate. Those gaps allow for things to slide through and go into the bloodstream. If that happens, then our body mounts an immune response, and the immune response can have interleukins, so IL-6, TNF tumor necrosis factor, a couple other things that will be produced, and then also ultimately turn into that level of inflammation. And so when people go and they get these things tested, doctors aren't going to test IgGs and they're not going to test IgAs. And the reason that is because there's no medication to combat that reaction. Okay, ultimately, if you're having these symptoms, you're like, oh, I'm a little bit little bit of indigestion, they're going to give you some Tums or some of the Zantac to try to suppress your stomach acid, and then it's going to lead to more significant damage further down the line. So there's a lot of things that can irritate these, but the main thing I'm focusing on today is just going to be focusing on the food sensitivities and the food allergies that you can have to certain things that you're taking in your body. So what that looks like, going in a little bit further, let me hide these two images here. Here's your normal immune reaction. So this is how I love the elimination diet. For if you can't really afford to do a food sensitivity test, it's great, but I personally love concrete evidence. Do I have a reaction or don't? So if we look at the actual allergy or the immune reactions, there's two different sides to it. There's the acute, which is your IgE, where you eat something, you automatically feel it right then and there. And then you have your other side, where you have your IgG, IgA, IgM, IgD antibodies that are being produced. It's not an allergic reaction, it's an immune reaction that's causing you to have systemic inflammation. It can cause tissue damage, like we were talking about in the gut. So when we have those reactions taking place in the body, our body can feel the effects. For me, I feel it instantly because I've been avoiding these for a longer period of time. My gut's a lot more intact. So if I put something in that I'm allergic to, my body notifies me immediately, and I know that I need to back off whatever the food is that I consume, because maybe one of my sensitivities slipped in there. The other thing that can happen is it can take 2, 3, 4 days, usually 3 days or so, for you to actually have the reaction. So when you're doing the elimination diet, they'll typically tell you to take something out, give it a couple of days, and try to put it back in again to see if your body has a response. For me, I love, when I get my results back, I love waiting 2 weeks, taking everything out 100%, and then after about, if there was a food in there that we didn't necessarily test, we can start to introduce that in at that point, and our body's level of inflammation has dropped. So what that means is when we eat a food that our body disagrees with, can't break down, or it can elicit an inflammatory response, our body will notify us, so that way we can avoid it. Now, there are certain levels of sensitivities that you can have, and it's important to make sure you get them tested properly. And that's one of the reasons why we switched over our lab companies, is because I wanted to get the most up-to-date, accurate, nerdy test out there, because if you've been following me for any length of time, I'm constantly studying, I'm constantly learning, and I'm constantly adding new beneficial things to the practice. And so I'm going to pull up an example of what that looks like. So the lab that we're starting to use, and actually was a funny story on how I got introduced to these guys, is basically I was meeting with another lab company, and this guy happened to tag along, and he was trying to sell me on his kits, and then he started talking about some mold stuff, and I'm like, I don't think you really have to sell me anymore. Sounds like your testing is pretty darn good. Let's see what we can do in terms of setting something up, setting up an account with you. So I went through and I saw the sensitivity test, and at the time I'm like, well, it's not as accurate as the test I was using before, because I remember talking about food allergies. And then I realized I was talking like an idiot, because it wasn't an allergy, it was an immune response. It's a sensitivity, not an allergy. The only allergic response can be your IgE reactions. And again, I'm the first one to tell you, I was trained the wrong way by a certain group of docs. But now I know better, and now I'm here to educate you even more, so that way you can know exactly what I'm talking about. When you get these things tested, you'll know how to understand them a little bit better. It doesn't mean they're not any less important, because they are massively important to avoid. Otherwise, again, you're going to be causing more and more inflammation into the body. So I'm going to go through here. I'm going to pull up a sample report of this test. So we have a couple profiles that we run in the practice. The reason that we run a couple is because some people want to test a whole bunch of foods. Some people would just rather have the basic 96 foods that we'd be testing for. But it's great because it gives you a whole bunch of really nerdy information. Again, that's what I'm here for. That's what I love like crazy. And it's giving me a little bit of a headache trying to pull it up here real quick. Let me just see where it's at. It's MK, sliding down here, MK, PDF, boom. Okay, here we go. So here's my food sensitivity test here, all right? So this is, I can flip the pages. I'm learning new things here today. So this is page 1 of what the page looks like, or what the panel looks like. This is what the report looks like. It tells you a little bit about the food sensitivity testing the IgGs, IgAs, and this is what the overall printout looks like. So when you have a positive find, it's going to be more important to make sure you're removing those foods out of your diet. Otherwise, it's going to be more inflammatory to you. Now, this particular patient name, patient, last name, test name, so there's no HIPAA being violated here. The positive find is going to be the IgAs and the IgGs in this particular patient. We have different categories too, which is really nice. So that way, when people are like, "Well, what foods actually contain gluten? Which foods are legumes? I don't even know what those are." Whatever. It's a lot more easy to read. It's a lot more user friendly. I'm going to slide over to this side so that we can see me better. It's a lot more user friendly whenever it comes to patient visibility. So we have the positive finds, we have the moderate finds, which usually have to take those foods out for about 3 months or so and slowly start to introduce them back in. Give yourself about 3 days to figure out if you do feel a reaction, and then if you don't, then you can start slowly implementing them back in. Okay, for me, I like to test and retest just to make sure I didn't develop any new ones along the way, but that's where increasing your stomach acid is going to come into play, and that's why working with a doc like myself will work on increasing your stomach acid to make sure you do it properly for one, and make sure you're doing it to the fullest extent. Now, this also comes through, and you have different ranks here. So I don't know if you can see my cursor on here or not. If anybody's on here, we have a couple of viewers on. Thanks for tuning in. If you have questions, leave them in the comment box over there for me. But if you can see my cursor, fantastic. If not, then I'll just talk. But we have chicken on this page, okay? So one of the really cool things about this is, say, for example, you get this test run, you neglect your stomach acid, and you just say, you know what, these foods are foods, I'm just going to keep eating them. Well, chicken's at a 9 right now. In order for there to be a moderate response for your food sensitivities, it has to hit that 10 level. Now, at a 9, the yellow is your IgG, the gray is your IgA. At a 9, it's pretty darn close to developing a reaction. So when you go about this diet, you can't just be like, well, I'm totally clean and clear on chicken. I can eat that every single day of my life. Well, you have a higher risk of developing a sensitivity because you're already pretty darn close. Think of this as like having a bucket where you're just throwing stuff into it, and all of a sudden it's going to spill over. It's at that 9 level. It's almost about that 10, which is where it will spill over and you will elicit a response or a reaction. So even if you're avoiding all of your sensitivities, but you're eating chicken, you're like, you know what? I feel great, but every time I eat chicken, it just doesn't agree with me. Well, on this test, it'll tell you that you're really close versus the Immunolabs test where you're either positive or negative, and then for me, it was getting frustrating because there was a little bit of a margin of error on it. I think it was like a percentage or so. This actually tells you about how accurate it is, and it also tells you about how close you are to actually developing a sensitivity. So it goes through there, keep going on here, and this is another nice part of this test. And now, when you run this, you actually have patient access to all of this, as well as supplement protocol, as well as 4-day rotational diet plan on how to actually implement these foods into a healthy living lifestyle. There's all kinds of really neat stuff to go with it, but this is great. So say you're doing a phenomenal job, you're avoiding every single egg dish that you see come your way. It will tell you straight up that it is impossible to completely separate the egg white from the egg yolk. So let me say that again. It's impossible to completely separate the egg white from the egg yolk. So it gives you these guidelines. It tells you what is commonly found and tells you where there's hidden sources. I found out that red wine is run through egg to pull out the sediments to it. So if you have an egg allergy and you don't have a brewer's yeast allergy, you want to drink a glass of wine, just make sure you're going towards a vegan wine. In Pittsburgh, they look at you like you have 37 heads on top of you. But it's important because you could have an allergic reaction to egg or a sensitive reaction to egg. Allergic if you have the IgE, sensitive if you have the IgG. All right? Going down seafood, mollusks, shellfish, talking about salmon, where that's all coming through. And again, anyone who's tested Immunolabs, it's a great test. This is just an upgraded version of that test, and it's a lot more user-friendly for patients. Okay, same thing, beta-casein. So this is splits down. We used to have a milk subfraction test with Immunolabs. This actually breaks it down directly for you. It puts the goat milk on there, puts whey protein on there, which is fantastic for people who are trying to use whey protein to be healthy. This patient's pretty darn close of eliciting a moderate reaction on that at that 10 level. Same thing with the beta-casein. So if you see something in there, you want to make sure you're avoiding that. Okay? Whoops. There we go. Any questions so far, guys? Whoever's on here. All right, so casomorphine, what that's found in. Cow's milk, you clearly know what cow's found in. Gluten-containing grains, gluten-free grains, again, just helping you to gather a little bit more of an idea of what this test looks like. Veggies, fruits, I mean, this thing is stacked top to bottom, okay? Now, that's just telling you about the food sensitivities that you can have in your body. Now, if you wanted to test the IgEs, there are 96 IgE reactions that we can test too. Same thing, blood draw, you can do at the same time that you're running that test. Again, you just want to make sure you understand the difference between the two and then what to do to rebuild it. So in summary, the number one cause of having food sensitivities is not just that food is bad nowadays. That helps, or it hurts, I guess. But the number one thing that we're dealing with is a chronically stressed society. Chronic stress is going to cause you to decrease your stomach acid concentration. That's why when you're stressed, all the blood goes out into your fight or flight muscles where you're ready to go all day, every day. But we don't have any of that parasympathetic response from the vagal nerve calming down digestion. If you're eating stressed, your stomach acid is low, you're not breaking down the food, you're going to have a higher risk of sensitivities coming on down the line because ultimately you can't break down food. You can't break down food, you can't absorb the food, and you're not going to be able to heal what you tested. Otherwise, it's just a completely useless test. So getting your stomach acid up to par is very important, but it's very important to also know that there are contraindications to taking certain acid-producing supplements. So you have to make sure you're working with me so that way I can help you to perfectly introduce it in to make sure we're not having any side effects from improper usage of supplements. It's not a one-size-fits-all here, guys. Okay? The other thing, too, is we talked about stress, so we need to figure out how we can eliminate stress in our lives, which is, it might sound like it's ridiculous to think about, but stress, what it will do is it will cause us to, again, decrease that stomach acid, decrease our immune system. So if we're decreasing stomach acid, we're not breaking down food, we're not sterilizing food, we have a higher risk of infection, we're still stressed out, our immune system goes down because our cortisol raises, so we have an infection, we're stressed out, and an infection is going to cause us to be even more stressed out, and it turns into this perfect vicious cycle. So there's always going to be a cause to a symptom, and the symptoms in this case are going to be the food sensitivities as well as the low stomach acid. So with that being said, I tried to make this video as short and educational as possible. If you found value in this, please like it, comment it, and please share this out to you. And if anyone wants to upgrade their food sensitivity test and run one with Vibrant, just call our office at 412-828-6000, or you can just direct message me or message me on our Facebook page that you're on already, and we can get you a kit sent out. So that being said, I got to get back to helping change patients' lives today, and I hope everyone has a beautiful day.